Right now, inside the corridors of Real Madrid, a decision is being forced that could reshape the entire landscape of European football this summer. Vinícius Júnior is being told in no uncertain terms that the club wants an answer. In or out. There is no middle ground left on the table, and the clock is now the only thing that matters. At the very same moment, 200 miles north in London, Arsenal are dealing with a very different kind of pressure. Their captain is being pulled into transfer talk that the club insists has no basis in reality, while their World Cup contingent is scattered across the tournament, playing knockout football that is quietly reshaping the club's entire pre-season calendar. And in the middle of all of this, the biggest midfield chase of Arsenal's summer has just been handed fresh momentum by a result nobody at Newcastle wanted to see. This is not a quiet week in football. This is a week where 3 or 4 separate storylines are converging at once, and every single one of them has real consequences attached. Let's be clear about what is actually at risk here, because none of this is small. For Real Madrid, the stake is financial, and it is significant. If Vinícius Júnior's contract situation drags on without resolution, the club risks losing one of their most valuable attacking assets for absolutely nothing in the summer of 2027. That is the nightmare scenario driving this entire conversation. A free transfer of a player of his caliber is not just a footballing loss, it is a financial catastrophe that the club is determined to avoid. For Arsenal, the stakes are structural. Their pre-season planning is being squeezed by success. The players who are still competing at the World Cup are, ironically, the same players Mikel Arteta needs building fitness and understanding ahead of a title defence. Every additional match England or Norway play is one more day shaved off preparation time. And layered on top of that is genuine transfer business. Business that could define whether Arsenal's midfield is actually strong enough to go again next season. Before we go further, if you want this kind of serious, no-nonsense breakdown of every Arsenal story that actually matters, make sure you are subscribed to Arsenal Daily Talk. Hit that subscribe button now, because we are about to go step by step through everything that is unfolding, both away from Arsenal and at the heart of it. The Real Madrid situation. Let's start with what is happening at the Bernabeu, because even though this is not an Arsenal story on the surface, it is relevant context for understanding how the biggest clubs in Europe are operating right now, and it may end up shaping the market Arsenal are shopping in. The message coming directly out of Real Madrid is blunt. The club wants a quick resolution to the Vinícius Júnior contract situation, and they have framed it in the simplest possible terms. Either he signs a new deal, or he leaves. There is no appetite for a slow, drawn-out saga. This has been described plainly as a financial question, nothing more complicated than that. The club's motivation is straightforward. They do not want to risk him walking away for free when his contract eventually expires in 2027. Now here is my analysis on that. When a super club starts speaking about a generational talent in terms of in or out, that tells you the boardroom has already run the numbers and does not like what they see. This is not emotional. This is a spreadsheet decision. A free departure in 2027 would mean zero transfer income for a player who, sold at his peak value today, could bring in an enormous fee. So forcing the timeline now is simply asset protection. It is the football equivalent of a company deciding it would rather sell a depreciating asset today than watch its value evaporate over 2 more years. But it goes further than that. And this is where it gets genuinely dramatic. There are reports suggesting Real Madrid are not just open to a departure, they are actively pushing for one. The club is reportedly prepared to go as far as offering Vinícius a cut of any transfer fee generated, specifically to make an exit more attractive to him. In other words, this is not a passive stance where the club simply lets things play out. This is active encouragement. The club is said to be looking to convince the winger himself to consider leaving. Think about what that actually means. For a club to volunteer a portion of a transfer fee to a player, that is an extraordinary structural incentive. It tells you the relationship, at least from the club's side, has reached a point where they see more value in a clean, well-compensated exit than in a prolonged standoff. When you combine the in or out ultimatum with the willingness to sweeten a departure financially, the picture becomes very clear. Real Madrid appear to be preparing contingency plans for life without one of their most recognizable attacking players. I want to stress something important here because accuracy matters more than sensationalism. This situation remains fluid. What we know for certain is the stance, the ultimatum, and the reported willingness to facilitate an exit financially. What we do not know is the final outcome. This could still end in a renewed contract if the two sides find common ground quickly. But the tone from the club right now is not one of quiet patience. It is one of urgency. Why does this matter to an Arsenal audience? Because movement at the very top of European football, especially involving a player of this profile, has ripple effects. Wage structures shift. Other clubs recalibrate their own valuations. and the market for elite attacking talent can be reshaped by a single domino falling. Arsenal do not need to be directly involved in this saga for it to matter. It is simply useful context for understanding the financial mood among Europe's biggest spenders this summer. Arsenal shut down the Odegaard rumour. Now let's bring this home to Arsenal directly, because there is a rumour that needed addressing immediately, and Arsenal have done exactly that. Reports had circulated linking club captain Martin Ødegaard with a potential move to Galatasaray this summer. Arsenal sources have moved quickly and firmly to dismiss any suggestion of an agreement, describing the claims as completely false. The message from inside the club is unambiguous. Ødegaard is fully committed to Arsenal. Right now, his focus is entirely on Norway's World Cup campaign. And once that is finished, he is expected to return and prepare for Arsenal's Premier League title defence. I want to be precise here for anyone watching this and forming an opinion. This was, at its core, a rumour. It was reported, and then it was directly denied. That is an important distinction to make, and I am making it clearly. Arsenal did not confirm any interest from Galatasaray. They denied it outright, using language as strong as completely false. My take on this is simple. When a club captain, who happens to be delivering career-defining performances on the biggest stage in international football, gets linked with an exit, you have to ask where the value is in that speculation. Ødegaard has just been directly involved in one of the most significant results of the entire World Cup, helping Norway eliminate Brazil. A player performing at that level, with that level of influence over a match of that magnitude, is not a player who looks like he is drifting away from his current club. If anything, performances like that tend to increase a player's value and strengthen a club's determination to keep him, not weaken it. The firm denial also tells you something about how Arsenal are managing information this summer. They are not content to let speculation simply sit out there unaddressed. They are actively controlling the narrative around key players, which suggests a level of organisation and communication discipline that fans should find reassuring, especially with a title to defend. So to be absolutely clear for anyone who only takes one thing from this section, there is no truth to the Galatasaray links according to Arsenal themselves. Ødegaard's short-term priority is Norway's World Cup run, and his medium-term priority is Arsenal's title defence. The right-back search and Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Away from the midfield conversation, there is a defensive rebuild quietly taking shape, and it centres on the right-back position. With Ben White expected to depart the club, Arsenal are said to be assessing a genuinely wide pool of options to replace him, reportedly as many as 11 different right-backs under consideration. Among the names being considered is West Ham's Aaron Wan-Bissaka, a move that has been described as a surprise given the profile of some of the other names in that same reported shortlist. Here is my analysis. An 11-man shortlist tells you two things immediately. First, Arsenal are treating the right-back position as a genuine priority this summer, not an afterthought. You do not build a list that long unless the club has identified this as an area requiring serious reinforcement. Second, the presence of a name like Wan-Bissaka on that list, described specifically as a surprise, suggests Arsenal's recruitment team is not simply chasing headline names. They appear to be running a proper, methodical process, weighing value, familiarity with the league, and specific defensive attributes rather than just reputation. Wan-Bissaka himself is a known quantity in the Premier League, with a defensive reputation built over several seasons. If Arsenal are indeed assessing him as a serious option, it suggests the priority for Ben White's replacement may lean toward defensive solidity and one-on-one duelling ability, rather than purely attacking output down the right flank. That is a meaningful tactical signal, even at this early stage of the search. I will treat this exactly as it has been presented. It is being described as Arsenal considering this move, part of a wider assessment process. It is not being presented as a done deal, and I am not going to treat it as one. What we can say with confidence is that the right-back position is clearly under serious review, and the club is casting a wide net to find the right long-term solution. The World Cup squeeze on Arsenal's pre-season. Now let's talk about the calendar problem, because this is one of the most tangible, immediate consequences Arsenal are dealing with right now, and it is entirely a byproduct of success. Bukayo Saka has helped push England into the World Cup quarter-final, providing the assist that took his country through against Mexico. That is fantastic news for England, but from an Arsenal perspective, it comes with a complication. This was only Saka's second start of the entire tournament, because he continues to manage an ongoing issue with his Achilles. England will now face Norway, with kick-off set for 10 o'clock in the evening, United Kingdom time, on Saturday. Saka is not the only Arsenal player carrying physical strain into a knockout match. Declan Rice is reportedly playing through considerable nerve-related hamstring pain, according to comments from England manager Thomas Tuchel. Meanwhile, Eberechi Eze and Noni Madueke have both been given significant playing time throughout the tournament as well. And on the Norway side of the draw, Martin Ødegaard was central to one of the most dramatic results of the entire competition, helping his country eliminate Brazil in what has been described as a genuinely historic moment for Norwegian football. Here is why all of this matters structurally for Arsenal. The World Cup quarter-final is scheduled for July 11th. Any Arsenal player who is eliminated at that stage will then begin a mandatory 3-week rest period, and that period eats directly into the club's pre-season preparation window. Arsenal's opening pre-season fixture is set for August 1st, away in Girona. If players like Odegaard or Saka progress further, potentially even reaching the semi-final stage, they would likely miss not just that opening game, but also the second pre-season fixture on August 5th in Dublin against Real Betis. My analysis here is about squad management under pressure. Mikel Arteta is now facing a version of pre-season that will look very different from a normal summer. With this many first-team players either still competing or observing mandatory rest periods, Arteta is going to be forced to lean heavily on fringe players and academy talent for those opening fixtures. That is not necessarily a bad thing. It is a real opportunity for young players to state their case in front of the manager during meaningful, if lower stakes, matches. Historically, summer friendlies have been a proving ground for emerging talent, and this year, out of necessity rather than choice, that door is being opened even wider than usual. There is also a subplot worth mentioning here. 18-year-old Ethan Nwaneri has spent half of last season out on loan at Marseille, and despite signing a new contract with Arsenal back in 2025, his long-term future at the club remains genuinely undetermined. With the first-team squad stretched thin for those opening friendlies, matches like Girona and Dublin could become an unofficial shop window, not just for fringe talents trying to force their way into Arteta's plans, but potentially for players whose futures are still being decided behind the scenes. The bottom line from a pure planning perspective is this. Success at the World Cup is fantastic for player morale and reputation, but it is a logistical headache for club planning. Fewer training sessions together, less tactical bedding in time, and a first pre-season match that could realistically feature more academy graduates than regular starters. Arsenal fans should not read too much into shape or performance in those opening friendlies, because the players available simply will not reflect the strength of the actual title-defending squad. The midfield rebuild, Bouadi, and the price problem. Let's move to the heart of Arsenal's summer business, the search for midfield reinforcement, because this is where the real strategic decisions are being made. So far this summer, Arsenal's only confirmed incoming transaction has been converting Piero Hincapie's loan spell into a permanent transfer. That is worth remembering as context. Everything else being discussed right now remains firmly in negotiation or speculation territory, and I want to treat it with exactly that level of caution. Arteta's midfield ambitions have reportedly centered on two specific names, Ayew Bouadi of Lille and Bruno Guimarães of Newcastle. Let's take Bouadi first. He is an 18-year-old talent who has been lighting up this World Cup, helping Morocco, the reigning African Cup of Nations champions, progress all the way to the quarter-final stage, where they are set to face France. That is an enormous stage for an 18-year-old to perform on, and it has clearly elevated his profile even further. He is also attracting interest beyond Arsenal, with reports linking both Manchester United and Liverpool to the player as well. All three Premier League clubs are said to face an asking price north of £100 million if they want to secure his signature, according to reporting around Lille's stance. Lille's president has made public comments essentially arguing that Bouadi represents outstanding long-term value given his age and remaining room for development, drawing comparisons to previous high-value midfield sales in the market to make the case that his true worth may be even higher than earlier reported figures. Before those comments emerged, earlier reporting had suggested Lille were seeking closer to £60 million for the midfielder, who still has 3 years remaining on his current contract. My analysis on this one is about negotiating leverage. When a selling club's president starts publicly comparing his players' value to other high-profile transfers, using specific examples of players sold for premium fees, despite being considered less talented and with less room to develop, that is a deliberate negotiating tactic. It is designed to anchor the market's expectations at a higher number before serious bids even arrive. The gap between the earlier reported figure of around £60 million and the public rhetoric suggesting a valuation well beyond that is not an accident. It is Lille flexing their position, knowing they have multiple Premier League clubs interested and therefore genuine competitive tension to exploit. For Arsenal specifically, this means the Bouadi pursuit, if it continues, is likely to be an expensive one, and possibly a competitive auction against direct rivals, rather than a straightforward negotiation. The 3-year remaining contract length also removes any urgency from Lille's side. They are under no pressure to sell cheaply, and every public statement from their president reinforces that position. Bruno Guimarães and the Newcastle standoff, now to the second midfield target, and arguably the more dramatic of the two stories, Bruno Guimarães. Newcastle have already rejected a verbal approach from Arsenal for their captain, and the club's public position has been described as firmly not for sale. Beyond simply rejecting the approach, Newcastle are reportedly preparing a fresh contract offer for the 28-year-old, a clear signal of intent to retain him rather than negotiate an exit. It is worth remembering the history here too. Guimarães first arrived at Newcastle in 2022, moving from Lyon, and before that move even happened, he had actually been on Arsenal's radar going back to Arteta's very first season in charge of the club. However, fresh reporting suggests Arsenal now have genuine incentive to accelerate their pursuit, and the reason is directly tied to what happened at the World Cup. Brazil have been eliminated from the tournament, and that elimination is being viewed as a potential turning point in these talks. There have already been early discussions between the two parties, and a verbal offer in the region of £45 million has already been rejected by Newcastle. Despite Newcastle's strong public stance, there is a sense growing that the Brazilian midfielder could still be open to leaving if the player himself signals a willingness to explore an exit, and if Arsenal are prepared to raise their offer into the region of £65 million. Newcastle's failure to qualify for the Champions League is being viewed as a significant factor that could ultimately influence any final decision on a sale. It is also worth noting how well Guimarães has actually performed at this World Cup, which makes this entire situation more layered. He provided 4 assists across the tournament, including a decisive late assist for Gabriel Martinelli, his potential future Arsenal teammate, in a crucial last 32 victory over Japan. However, in Brazil's eventual defeat against Norway, Guimarães missed a penalty in the same match where he watched Martin Ødegaard, another potential future teammate, inspire Norway's win. My analysis on all of this is layered, so let's break it down properly. First, the gap between the rejected £45 million verbal offer and the reported £65 million figure that might actually get a deal moving tells you exactly where the real negotiation is likely to happen. That is a £20 million gap, and closing it will require either Arsenal significantly raising their valuation or Newcastle softening their stance under other pressures. Second, the timing angle here is genuinely significant. Newcastle's absence from next season's Champions League is being specifically flagged as a factor that could shift their willingness to sell. Elite players at ambitious clubs often want assurances about the level of competition they will be playing in. If Guimarães is someone who prioritizes Champions League football, Newcastle's failure to qualify removes one of the strongest emotional and competitive arguments the club could previously use to convince him to stay and commit his long-term future there. Third, there is a human element worth acknowledging honestly. Guimarães has just spent a World Cup delivering directly for 2 players who could become his teammates if a move goes through, assisting Martinelli in one match and watching Odegaard dominate in another. That is not something that changes a transfer valuation, but it is a storyline element that will resonate with anyone watching how this saga develops. I do want to be precise here again, because accuracy is everything in this kind of analysis. As things stand, this is not a confirmed transfer. It is a rejected verbal offer, a publicly stated not-for-sale stance from Newcastle, and a report suggesting momentum could build toward a higher offer given recent results. Those are 3 separate verified pieces of information, and none of them amount to a completed deal. I am presenting it exactly as that. An accelerating situation, not a finished one. The bigger picture behind the scenes. There is also meaningful change happening away from the transfer market entirely, and it is worth understanding because it shows a club making structural decisions, not just chasing individual deals. Arsenal have carried out an internal review covering their medical department, along with elements of the fitness, rehabilitation, and strength and conditioning setup. That review has led to major changes, with the departure of Zafar Iqbal standing out as the highest profile exit from that process. Alongside this, the club have appointed a new academy director, Pascal de Maischauk, signalling investment and reorganization at the academy level as well. My take here is simple but important. Transfer news dominates headlines understandably because it is the most visible and dramatic part of a football club's summer activity. But changes to medical, fitness and academy structures are often the quieter decisions that actually determine a club's resilience over an entire season, not just a single transfer window. An internal review leading to a significant staffing change in the medical and conditioning department suggests the club identified something specific that needed addressing, likely connected to player fitness, injury management, or recovery processes. Given how many first-team players are currently managing physical issues at the World Cup, from Saka's Achilles concern to Rice's hamstring pain, the timing of scrutiny on that department feels relevant, even if no direct link has been stated. The new academy director appointment also matters in the context of everything else we have discussed today. With young players like Ethan Nwaneri facing uncertain futures, and pre-season friendlies potentially being filled with emerging academy talent due to the World Cup squeeze, having fresh, dedicated leadership at academy level arrives at a genuinely relevant moment for the pathway between youth football and the first team. So where does all of this leave us? Real Madrid are pushing hard for clarity on Vinícius Júnior, with the club reportedly willing to actively facilitate his exit if a renewal cannot be agreed quickly. Arsenal have firmly and directly shut down any suggestion that Martin Ødegaard is heading to Galatasaray, insisting he remains fully committed to both Norway's World Cup campaign and Arsenal's title defence. A wide-ranging search for a new right-back is underway, with Aaron Wan-Bissaka emerging as one name under serious consideration among a long list of options. Arsenal's pre-season is being reshaped entirely by the success of their players at the World Cup, with players like Saka, Rice, Eze, Madueke and Odegaard all potentially missing early friendlies depending on how far England and Norway progress. The midfield rebuild remains Arsenal's central priority, with Ayew Bouadi representing an expensive, competitive target, and Bruno Guimarães representing a situation that has genuinely accelerated following Brazil's World Cup elimination, even though Newcastle's public stance remains one of resistance for now. And behind all of it, structural changes to the medical department and academy leadership suggest a club making organisational decisions with an eye on the long term, not just this single transfer window. Every one of these stories is moving at its own pace, and every one of them deserves to be tracked carefully, without exaggeration and without getting ahead of what is actually confirmed. That is exactly what we aim to do here on Arsenal Daily Talk. If this breakdown helped you understand exactly where things stand, make sure you are subscribed, because there is a lot more still to unfold this summer, and we will be here to walk through every confirmed development, every credible rumour, and every meaningful piece of context as it happens. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.